This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So with the announcement by Paul Ryan that he will step down as Speaker, he will not run for re-election. Everyone is, of course, focused on who will replace Paul Ryan as Speaker.
Yes.
In the House Republican caucus, and who will lead the Republicans into battle this fall. Less attention paid to who will replace Paul Ryan in Congress, representing the 1st Congressional District in Wisconsin. And that's where we turn our attention, because there's a belief that that race is a toss-up.
Really?
That it could flip Democrats, particularly if it is a wave election. You got some Democrat named the Iron Stash running.
Are you serious?
Yeah, Iron Stash.
Is that their wrestling name, or they're really?
Yeah, it could be a wrestling name, but this is Iron Worker, who's one of the Democrat candidates. Raised a good chunk of change so far, according to articles I've read. On the other side, you've got some high-profile names that are being mentioned to succeed Ryan. On the Republican side, Reince Priebus.
Really? He lives in that district?
It's a name that's been thrown out.
Oh, or he'll move to that district?
Speaker Paul Ryan. Replacing Paul Ryan. The State House Speaker, Robin Vos in Wisconsin. He's a good conservative. I've met him before. And then another name that I've just come across recently, who's got a very interesting story to tell, interesting background, does not come from the world of politics, is a gentleman named Nick Polce. He's running for Congress, too. And Nick joins us now. Nick, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, good morning. Good morning, Amy. Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure. So your background is you were in the U.S. Army for a dozen years, and you were Special Forces. So you bring military background to the table. Give us the impetus to go from the military, and then I think subsequently you've been in private business, to now running for Congress.
Yes. Yeah. So I spent a little over 11 years on active duty as a Green Beret, multiple trips overseas. I got out in 2014 and then started a small business, and I was a small business owner for the last 4 years. I decided to run for Congress. The reason was my little man is 17 months old, and couldn't stand by anymore, and I wanted to take action, wanted to get involved, and take that fight that we were fighting overseas and take it to Washington.
Are you from that congressional district? So were you born
No,
and
I
raised?
didn't grow up there.
All right, well,
No,
tell us about you.
So my background is, I was born and raised in Connecticut. After 9/11, I enlisted in the military, specifically to join the U.S. Army Special Forces. And I left New England, and I haven't been back since. So as you know, in the military, you move around a lot, and we were stationed in different locations across the country. Started a business out in Virginia, and then we decided to move back to Texas. And then after my little man was born, my wife and I started looking around and started focusing on the future. And we wanted to get involved in politics and wanted to look for a place to raise our son. And so that's what brought us to Wisconsin.
How do you assess the job that Paul Ryan has done as a congressman and as Speaker?
Well, looking over the last 2 years, some of the things that he's ran on, he hasn't really come through on part of those. And we look at spending. Spending is just skyrocketed out of control, especially since 2050. We had that $1.1 trillion spending bill out of the GOP-controlled Congress. In 2015, we had the $1.3 trillion spending bill. We haven't been able to get anything done related to health care and removing Obamacare. Immigration is still an issue that's important to a lot of people, and we don't have anybody in Congress that appears to want to take action to put Americans first, to protect our borders. And so there's been a lot of inaction. And that's what I would judge the last couple of years based off of that.
That last omnibus spending bill, the $1.3 trillion, the argument was made by those Republicans who supported it, including Paul Ryan, and this was one of his big accomplishments in addition to the tax cuts he mentioned when he announced his retirement, is that this is to bring our military into a position of more readiness, modernize, update, make our military more ready for the global challenges that America faces. Is that a persuasive argument to you? If you had been a member of Congress at the time, would you have voted for it?
No, because the omnibus bill is a choice by leadership, right? You have the 12 separate appropriation bills that fund that part of the government, and leadership is making the choice to put them all into a bill and then hang that bill over the American citizens head saying, hey, if we don't pass this, the military is not going to get funded. That argument doesn't fly. We should have had an up and down vote on each one of those appropriation bills, and the Department of Defense would have been funded. We had one vote for the Department of Defense that's funded, and then we move on to each other appropriation bill. So no, that omnibus bill argument to me is an excuse, and it's an excuse by the political class to make their lives easier instead of doing what's right for the American people.
How do you feel about entitlement programs, about welfare, and what's the state of Social Security?
So those Social Security, Medicare, those are things that people are counting on, and so we have to continue to allow individuals to use those once they get into retirement. The larger picture on those is for decades now, especially with Social Security, right? The money's getting taken out of their paycheck and it's going into the Social Security Trust Fund, and then it gets swept into the general revenue and spent. And we've been doing that for decades, and that's a problem that the political class keeps making is they're spending, and spending's the problem. So the first thing we've got to do now is we've got to stop that spending, take care of those programs, and then the next generation, the younger generation, I'd like to see it voluntary, them to decide what they want to do with their money. But the individuals that are expecting Social Security, we can't take that away from them.
Is Reince Priebus a member of the political class of which you speak? Is Robin Voss, the State House Speaker in Wisconsin, member of that political class? What's your opinion on some of the names that have been mentioned for potential replacements for Ryan and challengers to you?
Right. So the short answer is yes. The guys and girls that have been in politics for a career, because that's not how this country was founded. We're supposed to have a concept of a citizen statesman, individual that goes to Washington, serves for a few years, works for the people, represents them, leads them, and then comes back to his respective district, and the next individual goes and takes his place. Yeah, there's been a lot of high-profile names that have been floated, and I think a lot of them have backed out at this point. So we're still here waiting. We're expecting another individual to jump into the race. And I don't know who that is going to be yet.
And this sounds like maybe this is a job for special forces because you could be up against the Iron Stash.
Yeah.
And I want somebody with military training against the Iron Stash, right?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Up to this point, we kicked off the campaign in November, so we've been running hard for 5.5 months now.
Well, how are you being received?
Strictly on.
Oh, sorry. How are you being received by Wisconsinites? I mean.
Cheeseheads is what they're called. Come on.
Should I just call them Wisconsinites?
It's like you call them Indianans rather than Hoosiers.
No, it's a great. It's been well received as we're getting out and talking, and we focus solely on this run, and going out and hitting doors and setting up events and just interacting, talking, listening, finding out what they want us to do when we get to Washington. Tell them why we're running, what's our vision, and so we've been well received. The biggest challenge has been getting our name out because we're political newcomers. And so that's what we've been focused on, is trying to raise awareness for the campaign, why we're running, and then what we want to do when we get to Washington.
Well, how do you put together the resources to generate that awareness, to market yourself? How do you put the money together?
Well, first we tap into our friends and family, the ones that believe in you, the ones that know you the best. We've been focused on reaching out through social media and doing fundraising that way over Twitter, over Facebook. And then now that Speaker Ryan is retired, that's opened up a lot of more avenues for us that when we initially started, they weren't interested in getting involved in the race because of who we were running against. And they saw it as a long shot, rightfully so, right?
Sure.
And so now that he's removed, it opens up more avenues related to PACs and other larger donors who would be interested now in backing us and the mission and the vision.
You had no idea that he was going to retire, and you moved your family here and to run for the seat?
So that's 100% correct. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it was interesting. So you were ready to challenge him in a primary, and I think you've mentioned a couple of issues of disagreement, like the spending bill. What about foreign policy matters? For example, the president and the Republican Congress's decision. I mean, supportive. They weren't consulted or didn't require their authorization. At least that's the president's view. But they're generally supportive. The strike in Syria, is that something that you support as well, that approach?
No, I don't think we should be getting involved in the Syrian civil war. I mean, history tells us that's just been going on for decades. I mean, his father fought that. I mean, way back in time, remember 1982, his father bulldozed the whole city of Homs, killing 15,000 individuals because he was fighting the Muslim Brotherhood at the time. So this has been going on for decades. And sending American soldiers, putting guys and girls on the ground there, gets us more and more involved into a civil war. There's not a clear national security objective for why we're there. Yes, I understand the larger arguments. I understand the great game, and I've been there. I lived it. Multiple trips overseas. I get it. But in this particular instance, I don't see the rationale and national security implications for putting men and women on the ground there, and then also to launching cruise missiles.
So how would you describe your politics? Are you kind of coming from a Rand Paul perspective, or is it more of a populist Trump perspective? It sounds like you've got a lot of Rand Paul in you.
So if we were going to describe politics, I'd say it's a constitutionalist. We had a document created back in the late 1700s which outlined specifically the way that the federal government is supposed to operate, and whatever's not delegated in there is supposed to stay with the people in the respective states. And so we've gotten way outside of that box, and the federal government's grown way too big. It's gotten way too controlling. So one of the larger objectives for me getting to Congress is to start to work and to push that back. We start to shrink the size of the government, shrink the size of the bureaucratic state. And so, yeah, there's going to be some Rand Paulian vision, and then I'm also a strong conservative as well.
All right. Interesting. He is Nick Polce, the website. You want to find out more information about his campaign, or if you're north of the Cheddar Curtain, get involved. Nick Polce, Polce, for Congress.com. Nick Polce for Congress.com is Twitter handle. Nick for House, at Nick for House. Nick, thanks so much for joining us. Good luck in your race.
All right, Dan, Amy, thank you very much.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.